This time on CNBA, Africa in the late 1800s, the Scramble for Africa. We take a look on the economic systems and how we reacted to the oppression along with our leaders.
Life under imperialist rule. What were the hardships and how did people make their living? A closer look on the apartheid in South Africa and the emerging president, Nelson Mandela.
I'm Solomon Thuo.
I'm Jasmine Candela.
I'm Drake Logan.
I'm Emma Furukawa.
I'm Wallace Watkins.
And I'm Claudia Doran. We are CNBA. We investigate, we expose, we justify. The truth is in your hands.
Imperialism in the African continent began as early as the 1700s, when the policy to extend a country's power through colonization, the use of military power, economic aid, and/or oppression, and other means became popular amongst the major European powers. However, true African imperialism began during the Scramble for Africa from 1881 through 1914. The imperatives of capitalist industrialization, including the demand for assured sources of raw materials, the search for guaranteed markets and profitable investment outlets, spurred the European scramble and the partition and eventual conquest of Africa. Thus, the primary motivation for the European intrusion was economic. In the 1870s, the Belgian king, Leopold II, sent emissaries to establish trade with the native Africans in Congo. This single act began a flurry of imperialistic activity as the other nations of Europe fought for the unclaimed lands. This immediate fight for land is known as the Scramble for Africa.
At the Bern Conference, you were authorized the claim to the land in Congo if the Free State is committed to improving the lives of the indigenous people, correct?
Yes.
Would you mind explaining to us why you ignore those terms?
Well, why wouldn't I? I hired Mr. Stanley from my private holding company, and I was finding colonies as a private citizen not the responsibility of a king. But additionally, I used the money from the state to build new structures back in Belgium.
Could you please explain to us how you obtain these sums of profit?
Well, yes, of course. The Congo Free State first started out exporting ivory, but you see, it just wasn't enough. But then a miracle happened, and the demand for rubber suddenly exploded, and we had plenty of rubber everywhere. It wasn't that difficult to gain a expected profit.
Any comments on the Scramble for Africa that is currently going on?
Yes, I am aware that I could have been the spark that began all of this, but it doesn't faze me. I believe that a great nation will have great colonies. That is all.
Belgium had the beginning of the scramble, but other countries soon followed. France, for example, built the Suez Canal.
The canal is 164 kilometers long and it connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. It is about 8 meters deep and 205 meters wide, which is pretty big and it can fit large ships. The important thing is this canal is single lane, so ships need to pass each other either on the Balai bypass or Great Bitter Lake in between. But this thing has been very helpful to both our mother countries and the locals here in Egypt.
The one in charge of this canal was Ferdinand de Lesseps, a French engineer, investor, and the president of the Suez Canal Company.
What was your motive in the construction of the Suez Canal?
I believed it would be a great thing to invest into. I myself was acquainted with the Khedive of Egypt and Sudan, Said Pasha, so it was relatively easy to obtain the concessions needed for this project. It was open to all nations that participate in sea trading, and Great Britain was thrilled to have this lifeline to India. I mean, the Suez Canal reduced travel between Europe and India by 7,000 kilometers. Now Europeans don't need to navigate around the African continent to get to Asia. The cost of many products decreased due to the reduced travel fees of many companies. Also, the passage fees of the Suez Canal has become a great source of revenue for both Egypt and us.
In Including the Suez Canal, Egypt flourished because of the Western influences beginning during the imperialist era. They produced cotton using new technologies imported from the West. They benefited heavily during the American Civil War when the southern cotton producers were cut off. However, their cotton industry collapsed with the end of the Civil War.
Many of the African states were colonized during the imperialist era. They were affected heavily by the economic demands by the massive European powers. However, more importantly, in the social scale, the natives were being exploited by the strict segregation between the mass Africans and the minor Europeans. South Africa had been under the British imperialistic rule since the beginning of the imperialistic era. In 1948, when the National Party gained power in its all-white government, they began enforcing existing policies of racial segregation under a system of legislation called apartheid.
So, you're an anti-apartheid activist despite not being fully what people would say black?
Yes. Whether I was half white or not, it didn't matter. If I was colored and had the blood of a native African, apartheid applied to me as well. I was often judged for being mixed, being not black, not white. This became part of the reason why I became an activist.
Can you please explain to us what kind of life the apartheid caused for the colored Africans?
Well, the whites were always more superior than the natives, even though they were the minority. There was also no mixtures between the races, whether it was schools, churches, marriages, sports, workplaces, even from the bathrooms to the water fountains. We were often oppressed, and since this was the law, there was nothing we could do about it.
In 1950, the Suppression of Communism Act banned the South African Communist Party and gave the government the power to ban publications that promoted the objectives of communism. In December 1952, Cicely, Mandela, Moroka, and others were tried under this act for their leadership role in the Defiance Campaign. All 20 accused were sentenced to 9 months imprisonment with hard labor, suspended for 2 years.
I served 26 years in prison for protesting and fighting for what I thought was right. Nelson and I both fought for what we thought was right, and I'm glad that we were able to accomplish our goal.
During the apartheid, many colored Africans were denied certain rights, such as mixed marriage or voting. They were also the victims to the philosophy of social Darwinism. Colored people could not dine, learn, work, play, or marry with any members of the white race. The law stated so.
So, Mr. Benjamin Dover.
Please, call me Ben Dover.
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Ben Dover. As a member of the working society, you should be familiar with the Minimum Wages Act, no?
Yes.
27 of 1925, correct?
Correct.
Has this ever been a problem for you?
Yes, it sure has. Been looking for a job for a while now, and I finally got this guard job at a big old Mr. Long's house in the large neighborhood. At first I tried to get the big gardening job at the hotel, but it has been taken by a young white boy who seemed like he just started gardening about a week ago. Now I gotta get a side job since Mr. Lang ain't gonna pay me enough.
Mrs. Gertrude, I've been told that you go to an all-girls private school. Are there any colored people at the school?
Yes, there are colored people that clean the bathrooms. But if you're talking about the students, of course not. We are a prestigious, all-girls, all-white Christian high school. Ugh, the thought of going to school with a colored makes me sick.
Despite the strong oppression and exploitation of the colored race, activists such as Walter Sisulu and Nelson Mandela gave people hope, and this ultimately contributed to the change in government.
What were your thoughts when you were a free man after serving 27 years in prison?
I was very happy that so many people valued and worked for the same fervor that I had. Even though I came from a rural African village, I was glad to be able to change the urban lives of colored Africans. Of course, I was not finished with what I wanted to accomplish. There were so many more things I needed to reform and change to make improvements to the government.
How does it feel to be the first South African elected president?
Real leaders must be ready to sacrifice all for the freedom of their people. There is no easy walk to freedom, and many of us will have to pass through the valley of the shadow of death again and again before we reach the mountaintop of our desires.
In 1994, a new constitution, which enfranchised blacks and other racial groups, was enacted. Elections that year led to a coalition government with a non-white majority, marking the official end of the apartheid system.
Beginning after World War II, many Africans gained their freedom through various ways. They shall encounter many issues, however, they shall always strive for the best and work for the freedom of their people and nation.
Thank you for joining us. See you next week on CNBA.